Welcome to Built from Scratch. On this show, I interview entrepreneurs under 30 to hear about the stories of their initial success. My goal is to encourage the next generation of leaders to take action and make a difference. I'm Eric Libby. In today's episode, we have entrepreneur Cole Smith with Opal AI. Originally from St. Pete, Florida, Cole is the founder of Opal, a mental health AI platform built to support therapists and patients. He began his career in machine learning after earning a master's in computer science from NYU. From there, he joined Morgan Stanley, then moved to a company called Asapp, where he led a core AI team focused on improving communication efficiency for major call centers. That experience set the stage perfectly for his next chapter because in June of 2024, Cole launched Opal. And in just 1 year, the platform has already reached 25,000 active users and has earned a spot in Techstars AI Health Accelerator in partnership with Hopkins and Florida Blue. Cole is just 28 years old. Cole, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Eric. Thank you for having me.
It'll be fun. So how we like to start every show, Cole, is we go back to the beginning. And I think it's really important to highlight where the founder actually comes from. So before your days as an entrepreneur, before your days at NYU, what were you doing as a kid? You grew up in St. Pete. What did life look like for you?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. So before NYU, I think I've always had an interest in technology, an interest in computers. I think anybody that knows me well, especially like childhood friends, would tell you kind of exactly that. I always liked puzzles too. I liked being able to take something and then have like a solution to it. So I was always kind of like the math kid, the nerdy kid, right? At the end of the day. But I always enjoyed, working with my hands and being able to like solve sort of a problem with that. I always had like an interest in business as well. I was, a kid running like the lemonade stand and things like that. I always loved that sort of thing. Yeah. And I think that's partially what drew me to NYU as well, which is where like the story kind of, I would say, like really begins, at least for Opal. So in college, I went there, I studied computer science, I studied economics. And those were, I would say, good things to study in tandem because they got me into like machine learning, artificial intelligence, kind of back before like people really started caring, I would say, about like before the AI craze. Back when people were obsessed with computer vision, not NLP, not the things that, I researched on in college. But the reason why it was an important time for me was because that was also the first time that I went through therapy. And I think about that time in my life a lot because I was going down a different path, I think, than where I would have ended up today had I not gone to therapy. And for a lot of people, it's about going through therapy, but actually getting to the end and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. The reality is today that is can be a difficult thing to do. It was a difficult thing for me to do. I had the luxury of having a therapist there that went the extra mile for me. I had it through like the NYU Counseling Center, and that really made, I think, a pretty big impact on my life. Now, then outside of college, I was working on Wall Street. I was designing like predictive analytic models in the finance space, working on Morgan Stanley and developing some of their first multimodal models for their debt securities desks. So I was working in like securitized products.
I'm curious even before, because there's a lot of things like that I'd love to get into, but I'm curious before you even go to NYU, do you remember growing up? Because you said computer, like this was important to you, maybe that entrepreneur knack, like did you have people around you at that time growing up that had that? Or like what originally inspired that intro level of like Cole is now interested in like computers and obsessed with them, and now like you bring it into school and these other professions after? Like what do you think inspired, if you could look back, inspire that interest?
It's funny you say that because I can point it to something. I don't know if this is the actual thing, but this is at least the story that I hold in my head. Is I was sick at home. I was like sick as a dog for a week. And I was pretty much just like chained to the couch with only like my laptop at the time. Now this was like old? Early.
Do you remember?
Oh man, that was probably like elementary, like middle school, somewhere around like middle school, somewhere around there. So I had this like clunky laptop because it was like, early 2000s kind of thing. But I had nothing else to do, really. I was like sick at home from school, and like all I had was my laptop to just kind of play around with on the couch, right? No homework or anything like that. Just, I don't know why. But at the time, I started just like researching more about like programming. And I don't really know how that came to be, but it like scratched this part of my brain that was really good for problem solving. It was about kind of like building and solving these sort of problems that I really liked. And I liked being able to like take a complicated topic and like break it apart, right? Break it into pieces. And I felt like I could really sink my teeth into learning it.
That part of it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's I guess that's sort of how it came to be.
Do you feel like, is there something with even before school, in computer science related, where you have this initial interest and it leads to that entrepreneurship interest beforehand? Was there anything you did preschool, or maybe it wasn't even that like computer science related, but just business focused before you actually went to NYU?
Yeah, that's a good question. Business focused. I had not like run a business, I would say, like in high school or anything like that. But I think, and mostly I think my parents will tell you this. When I was growing up, I was always like trying to cut a deal,
Scheming.
right?
You were scheming.
I was scheming.
Everybody we talk to
schemer.
has the same story. Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it's like some disposition or something within us that has the same thing. So I was always trying to cut a deal or wheel something. Yeah, so maybe that
Beautiful.
was kind of
That's how it
probably what
started.
it was. Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious. So you go through your childhood years, you're from Florida and you decide to go down to NYU, and your focus, as you said, was computer science. And I'm just curious, like obviously you had an interest when you were younger, but what did you, when you vision out towards the future, what are you thinking that you're going to do? You fast forward 20 years and like computer science is the ticket. I'm going to go build a $1 billion company, or I'm going to go work in a big firm. Like what did that look like at the beginning, at least?
You're talking about like the beginning at NYU?
At NYU, yeah. When you
Yeah.
exactly. Yep. When you went into the college career, what did you think you were going to do with your career?
Oh, that's a good question. So I always knew that I wanted to probably stick in computer science. For that reason of like it just scratched this problem solving part of my brain, this like building side that like I really, really enjoyed. But I didn't really know what I was going to do with that, right? I was like, I'll just like, work as a software developer, something like that, which is all well and good, But what got me really interested was in college, I took computer science classes, and then I also took economics classes. So this gets a bit more like nerdier in the weeds now, but these econ classes were really, really math heavy. And what they were heavy on was like optimization, which is like a branch of mathematics that is the same that drives all of like AI, all of machine learning is like mathematical optimization. So it got me really good at that. I had to in order to like graduate and like actually keep a good, GPA and things like that. And I figured like, I don't really want to do much with like economics itself, but I started working with a professor who researched a lot in artificial intelligence. So I was working with him. I published some papers around robotics with him. And then that kind of kickstarted like my research career within like the ML space. And at the time, it was a very, very research oriented field before we really started to see the practical applications of what would come from that. It started out in that sort of way. So I published papers there too in applied machine learning. I published in like ecological results as well. So one of the papers that I won an award for at a data science conference was in and around predicting energy demand through
holy crap
pollution. Yeah.
So it kind of started, and you just realized like you liked, so you go in computer science, and then you touching economics and then also machine side, and you're like, not really on the math so much, but I do really like how it's like the predictive models going forward. That's kind of what you first went in as, and then you learned like I like this even more than I originally thought. It's kind of So just curious, because as this podcast is geared towards the younger entrepreneurs, maybe people that are just starting out, as you just hit 1 year in business, and there's some stuff business wise we're going to talk about, but I'm curious, when you again look at school, when you look specifically at NYU, what do you feel like was the biggest takeaway you had from school that later translated to you now as an entrepreneur? Like, what are those skills you learned? Why should someone as an entrepreneur consider taking that route that you did? What did you actually take away?
There are certain things that you don't learn in school that are very, very important for business. And these were some of like the biggest mistakes that I made in like the first year. Was school will teach you how to do things in a very formalized way. I started out as a researcher. You do things the right way, the correct way, the scalable way, and that's what you're taught as engineers. When you now move into like the startup world, for example, one thing that I think a lot of technical founders, and certainly myself included, made the mistake of was actually building too early. It was taking those sort of things and saying, with like this idea of, build it and they will come. And I'm sure they teach you the opposite in business school, but they certainly don't in engineering. Now, that's not to say that it's not all for naught, right? In fact, I think there is a great advantage to having very good technical knowledge while also running more of the executive part of your business. So the things that I took away from school in that way were how to build like a really solid product. You cannot cut a corner when you're building a healthcare, technology company. You just can't do that. So learning how to do that the correct way, the scalable way, actually turned out to be pretty good. But where I think, again, they get tripped up is starting with the product, not the problem.
Yeah. Before defining, it's like, it's not geared, in some cases, not geared specifically towards the entrepreneur. It's like, all right, we have a full form business and we have a marketing department and we have a sales department and we have operations. And it's like,
maybe you got none of that. You got
maybe not at the beginning, right?
This is all maybe of those departments. Yeah, no, not in the beginning. Exactly.
So you continue your journey at NYU. You end up graduating in, I think it was 2020. Could be wrong. Was it 2020?
Yeah. So I graduated in 2019, and then I graduated my master's
with master's in 2020, and then you continue with your job at Morgan Stanley. So you're doing a summer internship, is what it looked like, and then kind of just continued on. And at that point in your career, with what you learned in school, why did you feel that was why was that the route? Why was that the decision you want to make?
I like the problems I was working on at the end of the day. I always have liked finance. Like, I was studying economics, for instance. It was a problem space that felt intellectually stimulating to me. It was a good company as well. Everybody there I really enjoyed. Yeah. It's a big company, but everybody there I really enjoyed working with. So there was, a number of reasons why, I figured that was a really great place to start my career. But I always knew I wanted to start my own business. I was kind of not about finding just the right idea, but I would say the right viable idea, right? The right thing that is not just like a techno bauble, but it's something that you could actually form like a real business around, where there'd be a real market for. So I was searching for that. I left that job after a few years to go work at a startup because I wanted that experience. I wanted to know what that looked like first, right? And I said like, let's try out that lifestyle. Let's try out to see what that's like. And I was running their foundational AI department at a company called Asapp that worked in the consumer facing space. So they would do like call centers. Again, I felt it was very intellectually stimulating. And there I learned how to do something very, very relevant for Opal, which was enterprise. Exactly.
Yeah.
But it was really like enterprise level, like human computer interaction, right? How do you build a chatbot that doesn't give 1,000 free airline tickets away when somebody chats into Delta, right? Like those were the teams that I was running and the problems that we were, tasked with ensuring are solved, or, problems that don't happen.
What do you feel like was the biggest takeaway? I mean, as you've seen now, you're looking at polar opposites now. You have startup mode, right? So you're going to get to that scale where you're going to have a lot of inquiries, a lot of queries of your AI system, but not quite. And so it's completely different than where that company was at, where it's like massive. From what I read, it's like massive inquiry. Like what do you think biggest learning lesson that you had that maybe you take into your next company, your first company?
Yeah, so you're saying like moving from kind of that later stage startup into like a really early stage one, like what I'm doing now with Opal.
Yeah, not to get too far into Opal yet, but yes, like what
Mhm.
is that?
That
What did you take
transition.
away? Yeah, what did you take? What was the biggest little chunk of wisdom you got from that other experience?
Yeah. Okay. So I would say that doing things that don't scale is important, but understanding where the line is drawn such that you don't create a product that cannot now service other people. This is a very careful dance, but it's one of the things that I think is quite important, especially when you're building a new product from the ground up. That could be a new product in a larger company. It could be a new company with a new product. The idea that yes, in the early stages, it's about signatures. It's about, leading with the success for your early customers and doing everything that you can in order for them to succeed. But realizing in the back of your mind that there is a strategy here, that you are building something that should be able to now service a market, not necessarily just one customer. And I think people
Mhm.
will disagree with me on this. Where there's a saying that says like build for your user, not for your market, or something like that. But I think one of the talents that you can take away as a technical founder is being able to hold these ideas in your head at the same time, being able to really satisfy and move quickly with your early customers, do things that don't scale, but also do so in a way that you're setting yourself up for success later. You're well architecting things. You're building not only your product, but your business in a way where there is a future for it. Get good traction and success in the near term, but set yourself up well for the long
Think about
term
long.
and have
Okay.
a plan there. Yeah.
Now, after a year and a half of time with Asapp, you decide to officially make the jump.
Yeah.
So enter June 2024, and we have Opal AI. So Cole, tell us about what your company does. What problem do you guys solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So what Opal is an AI companion that works with mental health providers and clients in tandem. I think we see a lot of companies out there that are trying to create AI therapy platforms. We take a very different approach to that, where we instead create this AI liaison, if you will, that works not in replacement to a real clinician, but actually in concert with them. So we keep an expert in the loop, and it's there for that 99% of time that you're not with your therapist. That is where
Mm.
100% of life's challenges are going to greet you. And the biggest problem that we see right now in the mental health care space that I think jeopardizes, the viability of the industry, altogether if we don't solve it, is this issue of early retention. The most common number of therapy sessions that somebody will have is one session. You'll get to that session and it might not feel like a good fit. It might feel like you haven't made enough progress because you just started, right? But for young people, especially, this can be a barrier to overcome. They're motivated, they want to be able to do something about it. But this more traditional model, this longer treatment plan, isn't always what people want, especially
Mm.
nowadays. Especially for people that are motivated, that want to do more with their care. This is that way of extending a therapeutic relationship into everyday life. So therapists and providers, practices now have the ability to serve their patients even before they get to that first session. Really to give people the agency and the confidence to continue with their treatment and really to see that light at the
Mm.
end of the tunnel. And I bring it
Right.
back to NYU because at that time I was able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if I didn't, then I probably would have dropped out and things would have looked a lot different. I would have dropped out of therapy. Things would have looked a lot different.
That's crazy kind of how that transition kind of came, where it's like you have this in the back of your mind, and now you're like thinking about this since NYU days, and now you come through these other companies, and you just said like you were thinking about this jump. You're like, even at Morgan Stanley, like, yeah, but I still knew I was going to start a business. It's just more timing. And but as you're kind of making those first few steps in business, and I think this is also really helpful to hit on, Cole, because you have these people that maybe are working somewhere and want to start a business, how did you decide, like all the things you're passionate about, like now is the time to jump, like that time was
Yes.
just like, you know what, cut off the old and we're in with the new. How did you know that was right for you?
Oh, it's hard because I think that will feel different for everybody. I will give you a some more background about Opal. It actually started as something quite different. It was a company called Numanotes, and I ran that from about April of last year until September, which is when we started researching into like more of a client facing component that would then become Opal. Released a paper in October about it, and then pretty much released it into private practice January of this year. So Opal itself is a much newer concept, but before that
Okay.
came something called Numanotes. And the reason why this is important was because where I started out with that was actually building therapy tools for my mom's practice. I was an AI engineer and ML engineer at the end of the day, and after work in the evenings, I just wanted to see if I could, help out in any sort of way. I had a lot of friends and family who were also therapists as well. And one thing that I saw her
Mm,
doing, my mom at least, was she would spend hours on clinical notes. So we're back in like 2022 right now.
sure.
The AI scribe business is just kind of picking up, or like the market for AI scribes is just now picking up. And she explains to me, like, I really wish I had something to write these sort of therapy notes. And I was like, oh, I could totally do that. I could build a model and do that. It's like easy. And turns out it was actually pretty easy to build. And then like 1,000 other companies did the exact same thing.
Right.
So we ended up pivoting to something that was what I felt a little bit more meaningful, which was a topic like Opal. Um, to answer your real question on how do you know when to make
It's the right
that
time.
sort of jump, right? So I was working on things in the evening. It was busy. It was more of like a passion project kind of at the time, but I saw that there was like the potential for a market here. And I would say you make this decision in two ways. One is absolutely a fiscal financial decision, right? You really should be looking at like, what is your runway if you do end up, quitting your job, right? Like, are you going to have health insurance? Who do you have to support? How long are you going to give yourself in order to make it before you say that, like, I can't do
Mm,
this anymore and I got to go do something else? These are all real questions that you should have an answer to before you actually sort of make that jump. So it cannot be fully emotional, but it does have to be kind of emotional, right? It has to be a little bit. And there was this kind of like light bulb moment that I was walking just around like the lake one day, and I just had this thought of like, what if I just like quit and just did this? Like, what would it really bad happen?
it's
Or
like, would I
really,
die? Would I die?
would I die?
Would
No,
world end? I don't
of
know.
course not. And like the thing that always gets you is like, you're gonna regret not doing it more than if you did it and
Beautiful.
failed
Yeah.
at the end
Yeah.
of the day. You really will. And that always kind of ate at me. And I figured, this is a good time in my life. Um, your late 20s, I'd say, is a great time to make that jump. At least I thought that way. You have enough experience and maybe enough runway now from working a few years that you can make that sort of decision. Um, but you're early enough to where you really don't have a lot of responsibilities, right? You can dedicate enough time to that business, but be ready to dedicate
Right on.
like everything for it. Yeah.
Do you feel like the years leading up to it, because you said like you had the seed planted for a bit, did you do you feel like you played almost scrappy, as in like your the way you treated your finances and money, like, okay, I gotta save because I know at some point, like, I'm gonna be mindful because I'm going to make this jump and I want to have somewhat of a cushion. Like, were you thinking about this years before to prep for this, or how? At what point were you like, finally, okay? And it came to you at that moment, but I'm sure you had some inkling at like, all right, let's have enough money to like be able to support that endeavor.
Yeah, of course. I was thinking that. I think it's a good like principle to kind of always have, like, life lessons. Live below your means. You don't need as much as you make. You really don't. and it allows you, it affords you the opportunity to take these sort of risks. So yeah, it was something that I was, thinking about at the time.
Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. So, all right, let's dive into some company stuff. Very, very tactical.
Yeah, sure.
So, when you think about getting your first customer and like first step in business, so you make that jump, you leap out. I'm gonna quit. I'm gonna spend my full time on this. What are those tactical first steps that you're taking to acquire user number one on your platform?
Yep. So I'll tell you what I did, and I'll tell you what you should do instead. And this is
Perfect.
where, mistake number one of being a technical founder can kind of bite you, is starting with a product. Don't start with a product. Please talk to customers first and build something that they tell you that they want, and not just what they want, but that they will pay for. That's the most important thing. There is a very clear distinction between, yeah, I'll try this. That sounds like cool. That sounds like fun. It's like, okay, well, you pay $50 a month for it. And they're like, no, probably not. I'll probably pay like $5 a month for it. That is a very, very different thing. Learning that early before you dedicate your time to building out a whole solution for something was something that I wish that I had done a lot earlier. And it would have made things, I think, a lot easier.
So you built first, and then what did you have to do? Go back and tear it down and restart almost, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so what I had built first was this sort of AI scribe tool. It was a way to automate documentation in, therapy contexts. To me, that felt like such a layup, right? It felt like such an obvious problem to solve,
easy,
that like build it and they will come kind of mentality, right? Not always,
No.
right?
Okay.
Well, for one is, yes, there is a market for that. That is something that we have seen really good traction with in the healthcare space, and it's certainly a part of the Opal application that providers really enjoy as well. But there was very large companies that were doing that sort of beforehand, and it's a hard market to differentiate in, because they all kind of do the same thing, and they're very easy to switch between. It's an easy come, easy go kind of thing.
Especially, I would imagine, as like you're just starting, like you're a single founder, like just starting in this industry, and it's like you have these massive players that have millions and millions of dollars to maybe target. I'm assuming
and
tough too.
I wouldn't say that that's a terrible thing in all circumstances.
Okay.
Your biggest set as a startup is the ability to learn and move quickly. This is the luxury that these larger players, even like Series A or Series B companies, don't have. The ability for you to turn on a dime is your biggest thing, because time is your biggest asset at the end of the day. Being able to look at a market, look, 10 steps ahead of what's coming down the road, and prepare yourself for that. Obviously that's a risk. Will that day come? You bank on it, but you can at least prepare yourself for it. And a lot of larger companies don't get that sort of opportunity. They're more risk adverse than you can be, as an early company.
Just taking massive moonshots. It's like one of these is going to hit. We're just going to keep running at it, keep banging our head against the wall. That's so good.
Exactly. But talk to your users, like have them tell you what you should be building before you build it. Yeah.
So as the technical founder, like you said, was there any like practical steps that you did to almost, maybe it's a mental thing, beat that fear out, where it's like, all right, I'm working on the product, I think I'm making progress. And maybe it's like almost smoke screen progress. You're like, we're making this bigger company. And it's like, but you're not talking to users. So what did you do to like, maybe what activated it, and what did you actually start doing differently? What did your like day-to-day actions, how did that look different?
That is a great question. And I have a good mental model for it.
Okay.
Is ask yourself, when you're working on something, am I working on my business, or am I working in my business right now? You can make yourself really busy with a lot of things that don't matter, right? Like if you're working in your business, it's like, oh, let me come up with all these sort of strategy docs, and like, let's build out like this, massive table of all the things that I wish that I'm going to plan to do, or, like those little polishing things that at an early stage you really don't need to be doing? Or are you working on your business? And by that, I mean, are you talking to customers? Are you getting in front of people? One of the more valuable things that we did during the Techstars program that my managing director there had us do is every week we would have a KPI meeting. And for most of it, everybody's KPI, mine especially, was just one thing. It was how many customers did you talk to that week? And you better get up there and be able to say that, like, yeah, I talked to like 10, this week. I had 10 new meetings with new people that I hadn't met before. And there's like this mild competition. The companies aren't competitive, but there is this like social pressure of like, I better have something to say, at this meeting that's not like, yeah, I didn't talk to anybody. I just like sat around and coding things. I didn't write a line of code during that entire Techstars program. And that was the most valuable 3 months of my life for that reason.
Interesting. That gives me some perspective for my company too. That's great.
Lessons learned the hard way, man. That's how it goes. Yeah.
That's great. That is really good. So when you're thinking about having these conversations with your users, how have you thought about a pricing model, like pricing structure for them? Like I'm sure that's probably morphed too as you're targeting a different customer from day one as you are today. What have you done to actually set a reasonable price that people are like, yep, I'll pay that, and then get them on a hopefully recurring type model?
Oh man, I feel like you're my managing director right now with what you were asking.
Keep it rolling, man. Let's keep rolling. Love it.
Yeah, exactly. That is, I would say the hardest thing that I had to learn for myself. It was like the most awkward thing to talk about during that sort of discovery process, because it's mental health. It's like supposed to be about outcomes. It's supposed to be about, people getting better. But at the end of the day, these are backed up by businesses that have to be able to stay open in some way. So you can't, you have to have a price, right? And getting to that price was, it was always like an awkward kind of conversation. I would say the thing that helped the most was I read a book that was really good, customer discovery, that I really enjoyed, that you might have heard of before, called The Mom Test. It was written by another engineer. It's
You'll have to send me that call. I don't think I've heard that. That's good though. I like these type of books. Okay.
This is a great book. It has very clear scenarios on how to do proper customer discovery to get you to that pricing answer, because you have to get to that pricing answer. I think this is easier in some contexts than it is others. If you are, selling more like pure B2B SaaS products where, other companies are trying to, be out there and make money, then maybe talking about money is pretty easy, right? If you're working in finance, talking about money is easy. If you're working in healthcare, you do have other sort of incentives at play, right? You have the incentives of the patient, you have the incentives of insurance companies, of practices, of providers. You often find more mission-driven people. It can be harder to talk about those sort of things, but you still have to learn how. This book was great in teaching me how to get to those questions. Getting to like an ROI is a great way to do it, right? Being able to get on the phone with somebody, figure out precisely what their problem is. Don't pitch, but ask them, where are you? What keeps you up at night, right? Like, what is something that you wish could be just so much better about what you're already doing? And then digging a little further into that. One way is like the 5 whys. Why is that the case? Okay, why is that the case? You get it? And then eventually you can get to a question of like, well, if I could like improve that by 10%, what would that be worth to you? What's that worth to you? And then sometimes they'll just tell you, which is pretty valuable. And now you have something to go off of. Now you could ask that question to somebody else.
Interesting.
Now, granted, you ask that question, but you increase the price a little bit. Somebody says like, yeah, that would be worth like $10 a month to me. So you go to the next person and you say, well, would that be worth like $20 to you? And they might say, yeah, I'll pay $20 for that. It's like, great. Now you have a new baseline. And then you iterate on that, you anneal it to, a price.
Okay. So always like just seeing at what almost like a comfortability rate. And do you, as you've pitched more and more people, do you have like maybe this might be too precise at this point, but like, all right, if 70% of people are saying like, yeah, seems pretty reasonable, that's your comfortable margin? Or is it like, we want more, we want less? Like at what point when you stretch that out and say $500 a month, I'm like, what, are you kidding? Like, are you kidding? I'm not going to pay $500 a month. Like where is that line almost for you?
Oh yeah, that's a good question.
Just an
This will
example,
look
maybe not
different.
necessarily a
Yeah.
specific price, but like what do you look for as to when to adjust it up or when to adjust it down?
Yeah. So the first thing that I did was understand their business really well. So instead of looking at my own finances of my business first, I tried to understand the business model of the places that I was selling
Mm,
into, which were
okay.
like fee for service practices. What do their margins look like? How expensive is it for them to find a patient? And it sounds weird in healthcare, but how much do they stand to make on that patient? These are the levers that they
Mm,
have to pull on as a business.
interesting.
And I researched those things really well. I asked questions around them, and I got a really good financial model about what I knew my customer kind of looked like. I knew what their margins were, and I knew what I would reasonably able to do to pull on the levers of those business, right? So if I'm able to, for instance, like improve engagement by 10%, which, goes into retention by 10%, what would that actually mean for that business? And what would be a fair price for me to charge to see like, maybe a 10 times return on
Mm-hmm.
investment? I kind of worked it back that way. And that gave me a rough number. And that's something that you can then bring to, real customer discussions and ask like, is this right? Would you pay this? And kind of go from there. And then I would maybe go like a few bucks up or a few bucks down, depending.
Right on. So almost like at the beginning, it was like very trial and error-esque of like it is like the most custom as custom can get. And then do you think you've gotten more reined in? Like, okay, this is around what, based on what I've heard, it's kind of narrowing in on this is kind of that number we're looking for.
Yeah, I would say
Okay,
we got
cool.
it pretty close
Yeah,
during
love
the
it.
length of the program. Yeah.
Love it.
Mhm.
So when we think about your new customers at the very beginning versus how you've thought about new customers today, one of the things that in our pre-onboarding or pre-interview process here, Cole, is you told me that you've gotten really, really intentional about your cold outreach, and I'd love for you to share with the audience, like, you had that shift, need to talk to customers, need to be reaching out to people. What is like successful cold outreach look like? Is it reaching out to 2-3 people a day? Is it reaching out to 50 people a day? Like what would tell us, kind of walk us through what you're thinking about, what you're doing when you're cold outreaching?
So I'll preface it to say that I'm not a salesman. I'm not an expert in this
He's
sort
the
of thing.
technical salesman.
Yeah, exactly. So,
So good.
I don't like being salesy. I don't think most people do, but I would say that when it came to cold outreach, um, there is a pattern match that people will do when they read a cold email or hear your cold call. And if you're following that pattern, it's
Mm,
like instant delete, right? So all those like little tactics of, oh, you got to personalize, like the first part of it. Um, you got to, have some witty unsubscribe kind of thing of like, if you want me to go away, just say like onion or something like that. Like, I think that
mm,
stuff is people look at that, they pattern match, and they know that you
just
just
turned
sent
off.
this to
Yeah.
like 1,000 people and you didn't do any sort of research. I took a different approach with it in that I started, and this is to get, those customer interviews, right? Before you can actually talk to customers, you have to get in front of them. So you have to kind of figure out or guess maybe what that problem would be.
Mm,
So I did some research in like, what are like some of the biggest hurdles today in telehealth. And I came up with a few different things that I wanted to test as an experiment. And I laid these out as an experiment. Those were things of like, reducing client acquisition costs or increasing retention. Those were like the two that I really led with. I laid out what I wanted to say, what I thought would make for like a valuable sort of value proposition for each one of those things. And I gave myself a target. It was like, I'm going to ask these 3 questions to 10 people and see if this is their number one problem. And if over half of them say that it is, that's going to be the thing that I lead with.
mm,
So what I did was I took those and I made just like very genuine emails. I put a subject line of saying like fixing patient dropouts in telehealth. So all I put as my subject line. I gave a really short email. It should be something that people can read on their phone. You got to remember that like most
mm,
people are probably going
right.
to look at it on their
Yeah.
phone. So no scrolling, no like leave something in the imagination. Um, really standard, like credibility building first line of like, this is who I am. I saw that you guys were, you're really good at patient engagement and like you have good outcome measures. I'd love to ask you some questions about something I'm working on and get your feedback. Would you mind if we connected like sometime next week? And I left it at that. It is just like very simple, very genuine, very exploratory, and not trying to sell anything.
No sale. Yeah.
No sale.
Here's your
all.
offer. Here's your one free, etc. You just, can I get your feedback? And a lot of people are willing to help almost, I feel like, if you pitch it like that.
Of course. And those were very collaborative, very helpful conversations. And you should approach those conversations when you do get there as discovery, not as sales. Eventually, at the end, it will come up and they'll say, like, so what are you working on? And then you can give like their, a sort of mild pitch. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I'd love to learn more about that. And like, okay, now you can bring them into your sales process. Now you can bring them down like, qualification, demos, proposals, things like that. Before then, your only goal is to learn. You're always
it's all about them first. How can I solve? What's the problem you're experiencing? Yeah.
Be obsessed with the problem, not with the solution. If you have to explain yourself too much, don't do that. Right, you should have them explain what they need to you at the end of the day.
I'm curious at this point in business, Cole. So you're just past 1 year officially since it's that transition. June of 2024 is when you made the leap. And I'd be curious, like, if you just magically had $1 million just floated to your business today, like you had it and you're like, all right, I got $1 million to work with.
Pretty nice, right?
It'd be amazing. What is that problem that you would first target that money with? Like what's that one thing almost that's keeping you up at night that you keep thinking like, God, if this just was just solved, I would be so much further along. Like what is that 1 mil? Yeah. In your business bank account, what are you solving?
Absolutely. I would say there's really only 2 problems in the business right now. And I think this would apply to many startups as well. Anything outside of these 2 problems are working in your business, not working on them. And for me, that's like keeping the top of the funnel full when it comes to like procurement and building the product to deliver on the promises that I've made to some customers. Outside of those 2 things, everything else is ancillary. It is not a priority. I would put fundraising in that category as well. You need traction in order to fundraise, and that should always be your number one focus, is like the people that you're actually, like building a business to go out and serve. Mm-hmm. So that $1 million would be going to taking like the sales process that I have developed like over the course of like these few months and scaling up, taking that, either hiring and mentoring people on that process in order to keep that top of funnel full, or engineers in order to, help with building out kind of like the product. And then, somewhere sit in the middle when it comes to like customer success and ensuring that like everybody has what they need, knowledge transfer for kind of thing. Yeah. But it should be about scaling up like that part of your business that is like the engine that people actually want to buy or want to invest in. They're investing in that sort of like, what are your COGS? What is the revenue on that? And like, what is the margin of those 2 things together? All of your other fixed costs kind of below that line is not what it's not what like private equity companies are buying. It's not what investors are investing in. They're investing in that engine that you're building. On that margin. Yeah.
Top gross margins. Yeah. That's beautiful. So when we look at this year of time, Cole, of you working on Opal AI, what do you feel like has been the hardest experience that you've had to go through? It might be a collection of moments, or maybe one specific thing that like, man, I thought this was the right move and I just am humbled. I don't know. What would you say the past year?
That's a good question. I'll be vulnerable with you about it too. So honestly, it'd be like co-founder relationships, drama, things like that. Being able to navigate those sort of things. And I'll keep a long story short and say that, for a while I was looking for a co-founder to bring on. And I was looking for the wrong things. Um, I was looking for somebody that would do that sort of like outreach for me because at the time I felt that I was an engineer and, I didn't want to go and ask customers the hard questions and do what I should have been doing all along, sitting in like that seat as like CEO or something. So I was trying to find like a CPO or something like that. And I think that was my mistake because that was a path that I needed to walk in like a personal kind of growth way. And it was a process that I needed to develop around kind of like the market that I wanted to operate in. When you try to, distance yourself from that, I think that's where I ultimately like made a mistake and who I was looking for. It led to me wasting what was a lot of time in trialing with people and putting something together and not really knowing precisely what I needed at that time. What I should have been doing was building up like the business, the demand, the traction in order to then have a much clearer idea about what that is later. And I think I have that clearer picture now. But that was, yeah, probably one of like the biggest mistakes. Yeah,
Yeah.
big decision, big mistakes. Yeah.
One thing that I always touch on each episode, Cole, is the ups and downs the entrepreneur faces. And as you kind of are walking through that story, you have this maybe rut. You're like, if I get this co-founder, like things are going to be solved. And it's probably this period where you're like going up and then you're crashing down and you're like just frustrated. And I'd love to know, and with this entrepreneurial roller coaster we go on, what are the things you're doing when you're going good and you just want to keep riding that wave and it's just things are going good and you just keep that wave going? And then I think even more importantly, what are you doing when you hit that plateau, you're at the bottom and you're trying to bounce back? How do you mentally get out of that?
Yeah, I would say that this roller coaster has like a high frequency, if you will. So like those peaks and troughs are pretty close together at the end of the day. It can be hard to think about, those times almost as like different. It's like just kind of oscillating between
same day.
peaks
It could
and
be same.
valleys.
It's the same.
It could be the same
day.
day. It really can be sometimes the same day. Um, Honestly, I don't think you have to think any differently. Whether you're at the bottom there or you're on a high, right? Like something really good happened. Just remember that it's maybe you signed with like a big customer or something. Realize that that is just the beginning and not the end. Even if you've had that customer for a year, you got a renewal coming up. Are you going to get the renewal or not? It's never sort of over. I would say, like, don't let those times make you complacent because the thing that you're always working against is time. You only have so much of it, especially, in a startup, especially one that has a runway to it. And always being kind of conscious of those things. You might be hyper aware of that when you are kind of in that valley feeling, but your objectives are no different whether you're there or whether you're at the top of that.
Got to keep moving.
Yeah,
Cole, what is Opal AI? What does it look like at the very top of its game? You made it, achieved the vision, built this massive company. It was the perfect success that you dreamed of when you first left that job. What does that look like?
I started this as like a more mission driven thing, right? It was like something that I wanted to kind of see for the world. I think a lot of founders in the healthcare space are mission driven as well. Now, the question is like, can you build a business around that mission in order to actually kind of get there? But let's say that you did. I would say that my vision for what Opal is to be is the front door for mental health care. I want it to be the first thing that this first judgment-free thing that people can get access to immediately, feel better in that very moment, help them get connected to somebody that really gets them the first time, and then support them throughout that entire journey. Because it can be a year, it can be 2 years, and really it's a lifetime. So it's how do you help somebody feel better during that time? How do you help them feel better more quickly? But then how do you support them after that? There is always going to be a thread of, your mental health in your life. We bucket it in terms of sessions. We bucket it in terms of like admission of going to therapy. The reality is that it's more a part of you than I think a lot of people tend to realize, right? And by kind of being that sort of full gamut, in the same way that you would support your physical health in that way, I want people to support their mental health in that way.
We see Opal in many languages someday. Multiple
Yeah,
languages, hundreds of languages.
hopefully. Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully
That's what we're pushing for. I love it.
Yeah, of course. It's all about, accessibility. It's about kind of like breaking the stigma down with it.
Incredible.
I think people these days are doing a great job at that sort of thing. And, we're just some people out there trying to do the same.
That's right. So we're going to finish the episode how we finish every episode on Built from Scratch. And it's with a quote that means the most to you, Cole. So the quote you gave me was, "Love the problem, not the solution."
Sorry.
I want you to tell me what this quote means to you and how this next generation of entrepreneurs, next generation of leaders can take this as means of encouragement to go out and do something big in this world.
I would say, what it means in practice is obviously talking to your customers, having them describe what the problem is to you. But I also hope, especially for people that are more technical, especially for people that find this sort of thing intimidating, that it is not a blocker for you, but it's actually like a liberator. It means that you don't have to have a product yet before you figure out what that business will be. All you have to do is show up, talk to people, and figure it out, as you go. Half the battle is showing up from what I've learned. So showing up to me means talking to customers and talking to the right people.
Huge. Everybody, that is Cole Smith with Opal. Cole, where do you want the audience to maybe go find your product or maybe just get in touch with you somehow?
Yeah, so you can find us at heyopal.com. So we also have a customer-facing part to it where you can try Opal for yourself. You can go to chat.heyopal.com or just find it right on the website as well. You can find us on Instagram, heyopal.ai, and then we're on LinkedIn too. Yeah, always happy to help. And especially when it comes to something like this. So thank you, Eric. It's been an incredible time and I really appreciate you having me.
Cool. Incredible. Appreciate it.